Access, ownership. There's a lot of different ways to think about what we mean by those two words, and I thought, let's just start in a very simple way. What do you, each of you, think about or mean by the words ownership and access?
I'll start with access. As a person born and raised here in Detroit, I found my way to the field where I work in architecture, not because I had access, but just by circumstance. So I didn't have architects and engineers coming to my school for career day. The profession where I work now that I've grown to love is one that I wasn't, it just wasn't reachable for me as a girl growing up on Joy Road. Access and ownership, both of those things together. So we'll probably get into how I found my way there. But access for me was not present growing up, here in the city.
Good afternoon. My name is Melia Howard. I am the district manager here in District 5, so welcome. If you are new to the city of Detroit, welcome to Detroit, and welcome to our lovely district. But ownership to me means generational wealth. It's the ability and the capacity to provide for your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, nephews, cousins, however your space, whatever space is occupied by your family. I know for me personally, I've benefited from generational wealth or from ownership. And that's a basis, that's a premise that we need to get back to, especially in this community. I want to make sure that we give residents the tools that they need to have access to homes, stability, improving their neighborhoods, creating block clubs, giving them guidance for financial wealth that's going to help them own and get the access to those properties. So that's what I see for ownership.
Access to me, I would define it as tools and maybe knowledge. My name is Tiff Messey. I'm a Detroiter, interdisciplinary artist. And then ownership, just because my profession is in the arts, space becomes an issue. So just owning the land and being able to create longevity is really important.
I think in thinking about access and ownership, for me, adding the qualifier of urban space, at least to narrow it for me, right? And that's not, and in some ways it's just the ability to navigate that space in all of the ways that you see fit and are possible, and having that open to you. And ownership, I mean, definitely in terms of property, right? You think of generational wealth, or you think of the kind of spaces you need to do your work. But in having access to urban space, that ability to take ownership of what is yours, even if it's intangible and immaterial, right? And that kind of empowerment is essential in both of those terms.
Yeah, it's this question of the different layers of ownership, right? So having literal equity in the land, having emotional ownership over the narrative of a space or the feeling of a space. I mean, I know that's something, Tiff, that you've spoken about very eloquently in the past about Detroit is a black city, right? And the role of that in your work and the work of many others here. I'm wondering, how do you see the relationship between those very tangible questions of ownership, like having generational wealth, and those more intangible parts of it? How do they relate? How can you use one to build the other, or is there a possibility to do so?
Let's see. Really, I mean, it really might just come down to like sharing of skills and knowledge and tools. And I was just actually having a conversation with Lauren Hood before sitting on the panel about how, yes, this is a black city, and I don't see enough of us, enough people of African descent talking about ownership or things that they are buying. or I mean, they're interested in having space and having studios. I'm often talking to a lot of artists, but it's like how they don't know how to go about acquiring it. Or even when you do acquire it, what do you need to do to renovate or develop? And it's not transparent, and especially in the city. Even with me doing minor improvements to my own property just so the building wouldn't be like an eyesore or blight to the neighborhood, I didn't know that I needed to go get permits just to fix the broken windows in the building. I mean, I wasn't putting any new holes in the walls. And that I would assume that I need some help, or at least an architect or something. But I didn't know, just to replace the things that were broken, I needed to go pay somebody to get permission. And I'm like, damn, like, do I really own this, or am I renting it? You know, what's going on? If I have to do this for every little single thing, like, what's going on? But I mean, that's not, privy knowledge, and that's just simple things, I mean, I need a new roof. Like, what is that gonna entail? So.
I got that. Hold on. So that's real. What she just stated, that's real. So here in District 5, we instituted a program called Pathways to Home Ownership. And now that's transcended into Districts 1 and 6. And currently that's why the land bank is over, because we're doing a Pathways to Home Ownership program. But in that program, we literally bring people in and take them through different educational sessions. If I get this house, well, what's the process? Who do I need to pull permits from? How much do those permits cost? What is the regulation behind this, that, and the third? We literally take you from what the banks need, how do you clean your credit up? Okay, let's get this property. What do you need to do once you got the property, and how do you execute on all of it without losing your mind or going bankrupt, right? Because that is a true frustration. And I'm gonna just tell you, I've heard it so much that that's why we did this. Because if there's no process in place and people don't really understand the process, I might have it in my brain and go, well, why didn't you know that? Basic home ownership is, it's something that we all strive for, but not everybody can access, right? For whatever various reasons. And even just the basic understanding of, if the tree next door comes over your property line, now you can handle that one of two ways. You can say to your neighbor, I need you to cut that branch down, or you just need to cut down the branch that's on your side of the fence. And so it's that kind of, those levels of understanding that our parents might have had, or our grandparents had, but they didn't transition that information down to us, because we've had so much movement in this community over the last 50 years, and if you are part of this community, you know what I mean when I say movement, and the levels of understanding that have been lost in the space, that we have to start over. We have to get back to basics. We have to teach our people and our residents, it doesn't matter, black, white, brown, whatever the case might be, yellow, we have to teach each other, and we have to help each other, and we have to share any information that we have, because at the end of the day, how are we supposed to develop a community or recreate a community, rebuild a community, if everybody is at a different space and place? And so I take that personally. I want to make sure that residents come back into the city, come back into the district, come back with an understanding of, you're moving into a space where people have already occupied it. I still live in my space. So if you're moving on my block, I'm making sure that I introduce myself to you, not because I'm a precinct delegate and I'm elected into that position, just because you're my new neighbor. And if you've got a dog that's running loose, I'm laid eyes on you, and we're gonna have a conversation about your loose dog. We're gonna have a conversation about, why'd you put that bulk trash out early, because you know you're not supposed to. Now everybody on the block gonna get a ticket because you putting your bulk trash out. It's that commonality, that common.
Malia, are
Yes.
you available to speak to some of my neighbors?
Yes, I will come on your block. I'm sorry, I got the pointy finger going.
If I might, I think one of the things that I'm hearing in the way that each of you answered the first question about ownership and the way that we've been talking is actually individual ownership. And while it's very important for the intergenerational question and like the kind of primary financial stability, it's hugely important to have some base of your own your wealth. But at the same time, it comes, as we've seen in a city like Detroit, where the primary housing stock is detached single-family housing. It's also a lot of work, right? There's broken roofs, broken windows, trees that are growing too large. So I wonder sometimes if the question is also at a different scale, right? So if there are answers to the question about ownership, they're at more of a collective scale that provide some opportunities for us to take care of each other in the way that you're talking about, but by sharing the burdens as well as the wealth. And I wonder if maybe Tiffany, you have some thoughts on that, because I know your work with the K through 12, or with students, younger students, is really about getting those students not just excited individually, but as a group, right?
So we have the same problem in architecture and urban planning, where we don't even have the talent base to hire people, people who are minority, people who are women. For the past 50 years, there's been 2% of African Americans who are licensed architects, and less than 0.5% who are African American women. Like, these are just statistics that don't represent what our communities look like.
Why don't you tell us how many licensed female black architects are right now in the US?
Well, overall in the US, 115,000. In the US, who are African American women, 464.
464.
464. And it goes back to access and ownership. Like, it was just something that wasn't accessible to us. But that's the reason why I went into, started the nonprofit that I did. I was walking through Brewster Douglass demolition site. And just by then I had worked on Herman Gardens and worked in Flint on public housing projects. And these are all the types of spaces where I grew up. Project teams didn't have anyone on that team that would live there, would send their kids to school there, and it's like, why, aren't we at the table designing these spaces? Because a lot of people in Detroit don't feel like they're part of this resurgence that's happening here. And I have some friends who live here now. They're not from Detroit, and they're per se here from, let's say, here from New York, and asking me, why aren't Detroiters doing what they're doing? They're here buying 100 houses at a time. They have investors. They have, they come from generational wealth. Detroiters don't have generational wealth. I'm a first generation graduate of college, so I had to navigate my own way through all of that, and everything that I learned is why, in a bottle, for me to just try to give it to the generation behind me so that they don't have to deal with the hurdles that I had to deal with.
So what are the collectives that have helped you the most?
What's helped me the most is just knowing that there are people out there that want to be a part of it. What's helped me the most is people being vocal about not being included. There are people who used to live in Brewster Douglass townhomes with towers that used to stand on 75 and Mack, and now they're in Brewster homes across the street, and we've seen them on the news saying that they don't feel like they're welcome to be at the development, this multi-million-dollar development that's going to be built across the street from them where they used to live. And so what motivates me is to make sure that I can get as many Detroiters aware of, there are properties out there that you can buy for $1,000. There are programs like yours where you can learn how to purchase property and get your credit fixed, and because that's just where we come from. That's what is generational for us. So I've walked through some, of Tiff's properties with her, and we're learning from each other. We both come from an art background, and we're Detroiters who want to be part of what's happening here. We don't want to be standing on, on the sidelines watching. And so, yeah, and we won't. And so we're both very vocal about things that piss us off that's happening here. I think that's why people ask us to speak on these panels. But, it's, and these, yeah.
So another, if I can reflect on this conversation, we've been talking a lot about the barriers to ownership. We've been talking about the barriers to improving property that you own. And those barriers are real, and they're a fact of, let's call it, quote unquote, the system, right? So we can think about how do we operate in collectives or in groups or in communities with people who are having official roles and unofficial roles to help provide the education or the knowledge to move past those barriers. But I also wonder if there's ways for us to think about dissolving those barriers. Like, maybe we don't need a permit to repair the window. Maybe that's ridiculous, right? So how do we give ourselves the freedom, or if we do give ourselves the freedom to think kind of beyond the status quo? Josh, your work has been looking at some of the systemic factors in the housing issues in Detroit, and I wonder if you have thoughts about, at a systemic level, what are the things that we could do to improve ownership and access broadly, very broadly?
What can we do to improve ownership and access very broadly? Number one is stop doing stupid shit, which is, selling off houses en masse, kind of giving, particular speculators carte blanche in these different areas. There's all kinds of things, and we've got a number of reports on how to do that. But I think, as everyone here has kind of pointed out, there is a lot of change in the city and people moving in. I think one of the components, or one of the places that the city can benefit from that might look like a fault, is that instead of thinking of property as real estate, we need to think about property as power. So it isn't necessarily where we're going to be able to buy something and that is eventually going to produce the values that we need, but because of the system that we're in and the way that property is advantaged, that ability to stay in place and that ability to maintain things. And I was here yesterday when Tiff was talking about her building and what she wants to do with it. That kind of stability, that kind of place, even though it's, it's shaky right now, gives you the opportunity to imagine much bigger things and much bigger opportunities and much bigger possibilities.
For the record, I don't think Tiff has any problem imagining much bigger things, property or no property.
No, exactly. But once you get in, as a geographer, I would tell you that space matters. And you get in that space and you see it, and suddenly that creative imagination takes you to places that are not only imaginative, but where you want to go, right? You have that material component that comes to it. And so I guess all I'm trying to say is that we can think about collective systems, we can think about it beyond the market. We can think about the stability it gives you, the way in which the socio-legal system advantages your ownership within those categories. And from there, we can begin to think about the collectives that you want to build out of that and the kinds of communities that you want to see within it without having to be as concerned about the immediate pushes or those things trying to push you out.
I was gonna add, I think, as Detroiters, what we do if we don't see the things that we wanna see, we try to build that shit on our own. And I think that's very indicative of, the nonprofit work that, Tiffany is doing with trying to give the tools to young Black future architects. I'm like, shit, like if I had that, and that's basically where a lot of this comes from. It's like my mom had to wake up, early as hell every morning to drive me to Farmington Hills just for me to have access to a torch. That's only where I was gonna get it. That's not in the city of Detroit. So I just think about, what would happen if I could walk to a space where I can learn about architecture, I can see a laser cutter, a 3D printer, and I can see actual reflections of myself. Like that's empowering. Yeah, exactly. And then, just work that I've done, being satellited in schools, teaching sculpture and things like that. The kids would come out and they would talk about stunting, right? Like, oh, free dress, I'm about to wear this. Oh, I'm about to be so sweet. And I'm like, yo, like, do y'all understand the full stunt of the sculpture that y'all have standing outside of your building? You see this every day. You chilling and you playing under this thing. Like, can you imagine how much this costs? I'm like, Jay-Z wrote a song about it. It's like, so it's like making things relevant, the tools are there, but it's just, you shouldn't have to drive an hour away to see, somebody work with the torch or to learn how jewelry is actually made. Like you can go and you see, you want to wear the jewelry, but can we learn how to make it?
It all goes back to access and ownership. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and I was looking in her book bag, and she had an application, like a job application, and it had some scenarios. This person has this background and this, this information, fill in this job application. And I wasn't really happy about that. She's in the 3rd grade, but how much longer will we be taught to be consumers? Why aren't they being taught to be owners and entrepreneurs? So it just, third grade, kindergarten, put that in front of them. Let them know that they have access to that. Let them know that they should own, things in the city where they live and beyond. Because like Tiff said, had I known that, I don't know where I would be today. I mean, I thank God for where I am now, but there are just some things that I should have had access to. We should have more ownership of what's happening in our city, in our backyards, and we don't. And it's unfortunate, but that's why we're here. So.
I would take that maybe even a step further and say that we have to really work hard to make production visible in our cities. Too much of the quote-unquote new things that happens in cities, Detroit and elsewhere, is consumption. If you go to the ground floor of most cities, all you see is buying, eating, drinking. You don't see people making stuff, right? So if you can't see it, it's very hard, regardless of what your background is, to see stuff being made. And I think we need to spread that. So we have just a few minutes before we end, and the Sequencer Tour is a tour. So we're here in Detroit. What's the one thing from an ownership, access, urban space perspective that you think Detroit can teach the world?
Ooh, that's good.
Save the easy one for last.
We only have a couple minutes.
Ooh, that's good. Ooh, hold on. Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm not gonna take this from a city perspective. The one thing, okay, so every day, I love my district. I'm gonna just rep my district all day. Every day I learn something new. So when I first got here, I met Matt Naimi and Oren Goldberg at Recycle Here. And the stuff that they were doing, like I had no idea that all this art, honestly, I go home and watch Godzilla at night. Like, I'm not doing the fun, artsy stuff, right? That's not my background. My mother is an artist. But if we could teach anybody anything globally, besides resilience, we are brilliant. And access to not just Matt and them, there's tons of people in this city. It's just those are the first people I met who were like, doing that thing over there at the Recycle Here Park and the art park, like that was something new and exciting to me because I had never seen anything like that before. But there's tons of people doing that same work. But as far as the brilliance of Detroit and the fact that we can all collectively create opportunities and that we can partner, because I didn't know Tiff, I didn't know she had a building and she was doing all this cool stuff. I had no idea you had a nonprofit. Being able to partner with them to show the kids who look like me, who look like us, the opportunity, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I'm sorry, Detroit's brilliant. That's what we're sending out. That's what we're putting out.
I was gonna say resilience. So just like, Detroit means a lot to me. I'm very passionate about this city. I do represent District 1. That's the best district.
No, it's not.
So where James Tate is anyway. So we could teach the world to, just how to push through anything, bankruptcies and water fiascos and all these things. The world is watching us, and they need to understand what happens in Detroit can happen anywhere and will happen anywhere. I always say Detroit made me who I am. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm from the projects. I'm from J Road. It's not, something I'm ashamed of at all. It's something that gave me the tough skin that I needed to survive in architecture and construction. There are not any faces that look like mine where I work. They don't expect that I'm the architect or the boss when I walk onto a construction site. And so resilience is what is in me, and just trying to make sure that I always remain professional when I'm faced with those adverse situations most of the time. So you guys know you're laughing, okay? Here. Most of the time.
I have a hard time keeping my 7 Mile at bay. I just really do. Especially because of being the only one that my 7 Mile. I have a hard time keeping it there. Just because of the things that you said, the nature of being the only one, particularly in the spaces, and I mean, I think if anything, that has totally inspired the trajectory of my work and my art practice and things like that. And so like Detroit is like, we're just, I don't know, we're the shit. Like I don't have any other like way to just say it. Like we work hard, you know, we have style that, you know, has finessed all over the world, the music that has finessed all over the world. Like, are we really serious? You know?
I think this is, no, I think, you know, often style is derided as not serious.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, as a newcomer to Detroit, this is one of the reasons that I came to Detroit. There are a lot of cities, forgive me, that are resilient. There are very few cities that are resilient with as much style as Detroit. Okay, lightning round.
How you gonna follow that up?
Silently, I think. No, I would just say one thing. I mean, I often think about it this way, that, you know, Detroit was the city of the future, and Detroit is the city of the future. I mean, this city has taken the greatest punch that capitalism can throw, and everyone here has survived with different types of swagger and influenced the world and continue to move it. I mean, I think a lot of the movements that we see, there's a lot of attention given to downtown and other developments. But the kinds of work that we see in neighborhoods, the kinds of ways that people have organized, and really the history and lineage of that organizing and the way that it touches on that deep and rich history of the past and continues to inform how people attach themselves to this city and this place and the land itself, only informs how other cities will deal with you know, the coming issues in front of them.
Ownership and access in urban space, brilliance, resilience, style, history, we out.
I know.